The narratives that you are about to see are fictionalized scenarios. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The Use Case 5 narrative demonstrates federal and public safety queries for historical UTM information. In Part 1 of this scenario, as the U.S. and Canadian Border Patrol personnel get set to play their softball game at Pinty Field, southeast of the farmers market, traffic monitoring and FBI surveillance drones conduct operations over the park. A food delivery drone brings pizza to help the players carb load before the game, then promptly departs the area. A recreational user named Danny is in the park nearby and watches as the softball game gets underway. He launches his UAS to get a better view, flying repeatedly over the crowd. A local law enforcement official from the Oneida County Sheriff's Department notices Danny's UAS and notifies other law enforcement officers in Rome. A federal official from the FBI steps in to help retrieve the necessary information. The FBI official initiates a correlation query with the Federal Aviation Administration, which provides identifying information about the UAS and its operator. The FBI official uses this information to determine that Danny is a regular who commonly flies his drone at this park. The official is also able to determine that Danny does not have a waiver to operate over people and contacts Danny directly. In Part 2, while the FBI official engages with Danny, a Canadian Border Patrol agent named George slides into third base and lands at a painful angle, fracturing his left arm. The Oneida County Sheriff arrives on the scene and requests an emergency services drone to deliver a splint for George. Jane, an emergency services UAS operator, initiates a medical use UVR to alert other operators around Pinty Field of her mission. She dispatches her drone from Griffiths International Airport and into the BB-Los Rome-Oriskany corridor. Meanwhile, the other drones either adjust their flight paths around the UVR, hover in place, or land to get out of the way. As Jane's UAS approaches, the FBI uses remote ID display services to verify that her drone is legitimate. She successfully delivers the splint to the Oneida County Sheriff, who is now equipped to address George's injury. While the medical drama unfolds, a spouse of one of the U.S. Border Patrol agents is watching the game and notes the number of drones in the airspace surrounding Pinty Field. She is well acquainted with the surrounding woods and is active in the local chapter of the National Audubon Society. She wonders about the proximity of the drones to protected bird habitats and later shares her concerns with local environmental authorities, who initiate a historical query with the Federal Aviation Administration. A historical query gathers UAS operations data in a limited area over a select period of time for drones that were using USSs. The historical query data includes location, time, and reference numbers, but doesn't provide personally identifying or contact information for the operator. Nonetheless, the information assists authorities in determining that the drones were flying sufficiently far enough away from the bird habitats, minimizing the impact on wildlife and preserving conservation efforts in upstate New York.
One of the highlights that we wanted to showcase and explore and evaluate is that once an entity is able to access that remote ID information and that ID itself off of the aircraft, we wanted to provide an app or a way for authorized entities with elevated privileges based on policy decisions that are to be determined will be able to ascertain an additional set of information. This set of information includes that held by the FAA in various databases, such as the drone registration database, the pilot certification database, the LOA authorization and notification capabilities database, to provide these authorized entities a holistic picture with data correlated to the remote ID that they have received from an aircraft. We're looking to address the feedback that we've gotten from a security perspective in order to enable those that have the authorization to go and take the necessary actions based off of a remote ID and the information held within the FAA.
Use case 5 is in the same exact area around the softball game. We have our sheriff's people down there and they pull out their remote ID application and they look at the aircraft that are listed on this remote ID application and they don't recognize one of the aircraft. But the remote ID application specifically tells them identification on the aircraft, and it tells you where the pilot is located. So the public safety officer locate that person who's flying via hand controller in the park, because it's not necessarily safe here. We got 8 other aircraft flying, and we're trying to do this, particular missions here in this game that we're playing and stuff like that. But during the game, what happens is a person gets injured, and we have to call in a medical delivery for a first aid kit and a splint. So what we do is we launch an aircraft from the test site. It's a true beyond visual line of sight flight, utilizing the New York US test site's COA to fly this. We did provide visual observers as a safety function. This entire flight was flown from our operations center that was located 3 miles from the actual softball field. Because of the long distance of the link, it was flown over an LTE connection and flown down to the ball field carrying a first aid kit. It takes approximately 15 minutes to get down to the ball field from the New York test site, and that aircraft enters that particular airfield area. The venue at the farmer's market is still flying. This is our maximum airspace density. And at this point in time, including live aircraft and simulations, we'll have 16 aircraft flying in the area. As this aircraft enters the area, again, a sheriff's person pulls out their remote ID device, which is their cell phone, and they identify this aircraft and make sure, in fact, it is an aircraft that they recognize, and it gets identified as the emergency medical services aircraft that's coming in. It's identified as a valid aircraft. Then it lands, makes its delivery, and then that's where we pan back to downtown Rome, and then we close out our events for the day.
The remote identification capability will allow us to safely integrate UAS into our airspace. It will also address the public safety and security concerns for general public as well as government stakeholders regarding the integration of these drones into our airspace. This will look to, in the future, enable operational capabilities such as the beyond visual line of sight operations.